Have you ever driven past a place that made every instinct in your body scream to keep moving? My name is Morgan Hayes. I'm a security officer for the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. For the past 9 years, I've worked at what the public thinks is a decommissioned research facility near Elliot Lake, Ontario. The official story is that this site was shut down in 1992 after a radiation leak. The government posted warning signs, fenced off the property, told people to stay away for their own safety. Most of that is true, but there was never a radiation leak. The facility was never decommissioned, and what we're protecting people from has nothing to do with nuclear material. If you stay until the end, I'll tell you what we really guard. The rules we follow aren't in any security manual. The protocols that determine who goes into certain areas and who stays out. The zones within zones where even my federal badge and clearance mean nothing. Because in some places, authority doesn't protect you. Training doesn't prepare you. And the things you encounter don't care about your uniform or your gun. I grew up in Sudbury. My father worked the nickel mines. My mother was a teacher. After high school, I joined the military. Did 6 years with the Royal Canadian Regiment. Saw deployment in Afghanistan. I came back and wanted work that used my security training but didn't involve combat. That's when I saw the posting. Federal security position. Remote location. High clearance required. Good pay. Limited details about the actual work. I applied. I went through 3 rounds of interviews. Background checks that went back to elementary school. Psychological evaluations. Medical exams. They asked strange questions. How do I handle isolation? Have I ever experienced unexplained phenomena? Do I believe some locations can be fundamentally wrong? I answered honestly. Got the job. Didn't understand those questions until my first week on site. The facility sits in dense Canadian Shield Forest, 20 kilometers from the nearest town, surrounded by lakes that never freeze properly and rocks that predate most life on Earth. The main compound looks like every other government research building. Gray concrete, chain-link fencing, security checkpoints. But that's just the outer perimeter. What we actually protect is deeper in the woods, in places the public doesn't know exist, in zones marked only on classified maps. My first 5 years were routine. I worked the outer security, checked IDs, monitored cameras, escorted researchers and maintenance crews, responding to occasional trespassers, kids from Elliot Lake looking for abandoned buildings, hikers who'd wandered off trails, conspiracy theorists trying to prove the radiation story was fake. We'd turn them away. File reports. Standard security work. But I noticed things. Researchers who worked in the interior zones never talked about their work. Not even with each other. They'd come back from shifts looking exhausted, shaken. Some requested transfers after only a few months. Others became obsessed, working double shifts, going into areas they weren't assigned to. Those ones usually got escorted out by armed guards and never came back. I also noticed the zones themselves. The facility is divided into color-coded security levels. Green zones are public-facing. Yellow zones require standard clearance. Orange zones need specialized authorization. But there are also zones marked in red on our maps. And beyond those, areas marked in black. No zone designation. No official name. Just coordinates and the notation. Access forbidden except under Directive 7 protocols. I'd been there 5 years before anyone explained what Directive 7 meant. Before I understood why some areas on our maps were blank. Before I learned that what we guard isn't contained in the buildings. It's in the land itself. In specific locations where something happened decades ago. Something that can't be fixed or cleaned up or made safe. Something that just has to be monitored, contained, Kept away from people who don't understand the rules. The day everything changed was a Tuesday in October. Late afternoon. I was working the inner checkpoint when my supervisor called me into his office. His name is Victor Chun. He's 54 years old. Former RCMP. Been at this facility for 22 years. He's methodical. By the book. Not the type to bend rules or share information unnecessarily. "Morgan," he said, not looking up from his computer, "I'm moving you to interior security. Effective immediately. I'd been requesting that transfer for 2 years. Interior security meant better pay, more responsibility, access to the classified zones." "Thank you, sir. I won't. This isn't a promotion." He finally looked at me. 3 officers have quit in the last month. 2 more requested medical leave. We're short-staffed. You're the only person with sufficient clearance and psychological evaluation scores who hasn't worked interior yet. So you're it. What happened to the other officers? That's not relevant to your duties. He pulled out a tablet. Before you start, you need to understand something. The work you've done for 5 years? That was a security theater. Keeping civilians away from a location they think is radioactive. Important work, but ultimately just monitoring fences and checking IDs. Interior security is different. You'll see things that don't make sense. You'll encounter situations that contradict your training. And you'll follow protocols that seem arbitrary or even dangerous. My skin prickled. What kind of situations? The kind where your badge doesn't protect you, where your gun is useless, where the only thing keeping you safe is following the rules exactly as they're written. He handed me the tablet. These are the Directive 7 protocols. Study them. Memorize them. Starting tomorrow, your life depends on them. I looked at the screen. The document was titled Interior Zone Security Protocols, Directive 7 Classification Level. Eyes only. Below that, a warning in red text. Violation of these protocols may result in immediate termination, criminal prosecution, or death. In that order of preference. Death. I said, "Sir, what exactly am I protecting?" Victor stood up. I walked to his window that looked out over the compound. Beyond the buildings, I could see the forest. Dense, dark. Even in daylight, the trees seemed to swallow the light. "You're not protecting anything, Morgan. You're being protected from something. The protocols exist to keep you alive while you work zones that shouldn't have human presence at all. But they need monitoring. They need someone to check the boundary markers, to report changes, to make sure nothing crosses from the dead zones into areas where people actually work." Dead zones? That's what we call them unofficially. Areas where something happened, something that fundamentally changed the location, made it hostile to human life in ways that can't be explained by radiation or chemical contamination, or any conventional hazard. We don't understand what they are. We just know they exist. We know they're dangerous. And we know that certain protocols, if followed exactly, allow humans to work near them without consequences. What kind of consequences? He turned back to me. Read the protocols. Study the case files attached to them. You'll understand why the rules exist. Why they're non-negotiable. Why does every officer who's broken them either quit, went on medical leave, or disappeared? Disappeared? 3 cases in the last 20 years. Officers who violated protocols. Who entered zones they weren't authorized for. Who stayed too long or ignored warning signs. Their bodies were never found. The search teams wouldn't enter certain areas to look for them, because the protocols forbid it. And the protocols exist for a reason. He sat back down. Go home. Read everything on that tablet. Tomorrow morning you report at 6 a.m. for orientation. You'll spend the day with the senior interior officer learning the routes, learning what to look for, learning how to stay safe. After that, you're on your own. Solo patrols, 8-hour shifts, just you in the dead zones. Questions. I had 1,000 questions, but looking at Victor's expression, I knew he wouldn't answer them. Not yet. No, sir. Good. And Morgan? Everything you read on that tablet tonight will sound insane. Paranoid. Like someone wrote security protocols based on superstition rather than actual threats. I need you to understand something. Those protocols were written in blood. Every rule exists because someone died or went missing or came back changed. Trust the protocols, even when they don't make sense. Especially when they don't make sense. Because in the dead zones, logic doesn't apply. Training doesn't matter. The only thing that keeps you safe is following rules written by people who learn the hard way what happens when you don't. I left his office with the tablet feeling heavier than it should. That evening, I sat in my apartment reading protocols that made my skin crawl. Rules about never entering certain grid coordinates after dusk. About evacuating immediately if you hear specific sounds. About never investigating light sources in restricted areas. About what to do if the boundary markers move on their own. Each protocol had a case file attached. Officers who'd broken that specific rule. What happened to them? Most files ended with status, unknown, or medical discharge, psychiatric evaluation required, or simply terminated, no remains recovered. One case file stuck with me. An officer named Patricia Dunn. Worked interior security in 2011. Experienced. Competent. One night she radioed in that she'd found a researcher wandering in a red zone. Against protocol, she entered the zone to escort them out. Her radio went silent. Search teams found her vehicle the next morning. Engine running. The door open. Her equipment laid out neatly on the hood. Patricia Dunn was never seen again. The researcher she'd gone in to help didn't exist. No one by that description worked at the facility. No one was reported missing. The figure she'd seen wasn't human. It was something else. Something that used familiar shapes to lure people into zones where the protocols couldn't protect them. I read until 3 a.m. Then I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow I'd start working on the interior. Walking routes through forests that looked normal but weren't. Monitoring zones where my federal badge and security training meant nothing. Where the only thing between me and whatever existed in those spaces was a set of rules I didn't fully understand. But I'd signed the contract. Accepted the position. There was no backing out now. Tomorrow morning, I'd learn what really happened at this facility. What we actually guard. Why are some places on our maps marked in black? Why did my supervisor tell me my badge doesn't protect me here? Because in the dead zones of Northern Ontario, something exists that doesn't follow the rules of normal reality. Something that's been here longer than the facility. Longer than human presence in this region. Something that can't be contained or neutralized or understood. Only monitored. Only respected. Only survived by following protocols written by the people who came before me. The ones who learned what happens when you break the rules. The ones who didn't all make it back to tell us what they found. And tomorrow I'd walk those same paths. Monitor those same zones. Follow those same rules. Because in a place where your badge doesn't protect you, the protocols are the only thing standing between you and becoming another case file. Another disappeared officer. Another warning for whoever comes after me. The orientation started at 6 a.m. sharp. I met my trainer in the security office. Her name was Keiko Sato. She was 38 years old. Japanese Canadian. She'd been working interior security for 6 years. She looked tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. Dark circles under her eyes. Hands that trembled slightly when she poured coffee. You read the protocols? She asked, not making eye contact. All of them. 3 times. Good. Because out there you won't have time to check your tablet. You need to know the rules by heart. Know them so well they become instinct. She handed me a radio, different from the standard security radios. Heavier, with a red emergency button. This is your lifeline. It only works in certain zones. In others, it goes silent. When that happens, you follow Protocol 12. Complete radio silence. No attempts to call for help. No panic. Just immediate evacuation following your primary route. Understood. Why does the radio stop working? We don't know. Interference, maybe. Or something about those zones disrupts electronics. Or something in those zones doesn't want us calling for help. She finally looked at me. You'll learn quickly that we don't know is the most honest answer for most questions about this place. We observe. We document. We follow protocols. But we don't understand. And the people who tried too hard to understand are the ones who disappeared. She led me outside. We walked past the main buildings toward the tree line. The morning was cold. Frost on the ground. My breath is visible. Normal October morning in northern Ontario. But as we approached the forest, something changed. The air felt heavier. The light seemed dimmer despite the clear sky. And the silence was too complete. No birds. No wind through the trees. Just absolutely quiet. That's the first sign, Keiko said. The silence. When you enter certain zones, natural sounds stop. No birds. No insects. Even the wind seems to die. If that happens, you check your position. If you're in an authorized zone during daylight hours, you continue your patrol. If you're in an unauthorized zone or it's after permitted hours, you evacuate immediately. No exceptions. We reached a gate in the fence, different from the outer perimeter. This one was reinforced steel. Electronic lock. Camera. And a sign that made my blood run cold. Dead zone boundary. Authorization required. Protective protocols mandatory. No exceptions. Keiko scanned her badge. The gate opened. We walked through. And the world changed. The forest on the other side looked the same. Same trees. Same rocks. Same Canadian Shield landscape. But something was fundamentally wrong. The shadows fell at incorrect angles. The trees seemed too straight, too uniform. And the silence was oppressive. Complete. Like we'd stepped into a vacuum. This is Zone Red 7, Keiko said quietly. One of the less severe dead zones. We patrol the perimeter. Check boundary markers. Document any changes. But we never, under any circumstances, enter the interior of this zone. You see that line of yellow markers ahead? I looked. About 50 meters into the forest, yellow posts formed a large circle, maybe 200 meters in diameter. The forest inside the circle looked identical to the forest outside. But something about it was wrong. Looking at it made my eyes hurt, made my stomach turn. That's the core zone, Keiko explained. Nothing enters that circle. Not animals. Not plants. Not people. If something crosses that boundary inward, it doesn't come back out. If you see anything inside that circle, movement, lights, people, anything, you don't investigate. You document the grid coordinates. You report it when you're back in green zones. But you never ever cross that yellow line. What happens if you do? We don't know. The 3 officers who disappeared all had their last known positions inside core zones. Whether they entered voluntarily or something pulled them in, we can't say. But their vehicles were found at the perimeter. Engines running. Doors open. Like they'd stepped out for a moment and just never came back. We walked the perimeter of Zone Red 7. Keiko showed me how to check the boundary markers. How to document their positions. how to look for signs of disturbance. Every 30 meters we'd stop. She'd point out details, markers that had shifted slightly, tree bark that had unusual patterns, areas where the frost had melted in perfect geometric shapes. You document everything anomalous, she said. But you don't try to explain it. Don't try to make sense of it. Just record what you see and keep moving. The protocols give you specific routes with specific timing. You follow those routes exactly. You never deviate. You never take shortcuts. You never investigate interesting anomalies on your own. Because the moment you break routine, the moment you follow curiosity instead of protocol, that's when things go wrong. We were about halfway around the perimeter when I saw it. Inside the core zone, just beyond the yellow markers. A figure, standing between the trees, human-shaped, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, completely motionless. "Keiko," I whispered. "There's someone in the core zone." "No, there isn't." She didn't even look. "Keep walking." Eyes on the path. That's Protocol 15. If you see human figures in prohibited zones, you do not acknowledge them. Do not make eye contact. Do not speak to them. Do not investigate. They're not human. They're not people who need help. They're something else. Something that appears in restricted areas. Something that uses familiar shapes to draw people in. But what if it's not? Her voice was sharp now. Last year, an officer named Robertson saw what looked like a lost child in a core zone. Against protocol, he crossed the yellow markers to help. We found his vehicle 2 hours later. He'd made it back to his truck, started the engine. Then he'd gotten out. I walked back toward the core zone, left footprints in the snow leading right up to the yellow markers. Then the prints stopped, like he'd evaporated. We reviewed his body camera footage. The last thing recorded was him standing at the boundary, reaching toward something. He said, "I understand now. I have to go back." Then the camera shut off. Robert Chun has been missing for 14 months. I forced myself not to look at the figure, kept my eyes on the path. My skin was crawling. Every instinct screamed to check if the figure was still there. But I followed Keiko, trusted the protocol. We walked another 20 meters before I couldn't help it. I glanced back. The figure was gone. But in the exact spot where it had been standing, the yellow boundary marker had fallen over, knocked inward, toward the core zone. "Keiko," I said, "one of the markers is down." She stopped, pulled out a tablet, made a note. "Grid coordinates D7 marker 23. Compromised. We'll report it. The maintenance team will reset it tomorrow. During daylight. With full protective protocols." She looked at me. "That's how it tests you. Shows you things. Makes you curious. Creates situations that seem to require immediate action. But the protocols forbid immediate response. Everything goes through proper channels. Everything happens during authorized hours with proper oversight. Because when you respond to anomalies alone, when you break protocol to fix an urgent problem, that's when you become the next missing person." We finished the perimeter check. Keiko led me back to the gate. As we crossed the boundary, the world shifted again. The sound returned. Birds singing. Wind in the trees. The oppressive silence lifted. I could breathe normally again. "That was a standard patrol of a red zone," Keiko said. "Tomorrow you'll see an orange zone. Less severe anomalies but covering larger areas. Then we'll work up to a black zone. Those are the worst. The oldest. The ones where the protocols are most strict because that's where most officers have disappeared." "How many zones are there in total?" "Officially? 12 red zones, 6 orange zones, 2 black zones. All within a 20-kilometer radius of this facility. Unofficially, She looked at the forest. We don't know. We only monitor the ones we've discovered, the ones where incidents have occurred. But there might be others. Places we haven't found yet. Places where the markers haven't been set. Places where someone could wander in without knowing the rules. And the public thinks this is all just a radiation-contaminated decommissioned site. The radiation story is convenient. It keeps people away without requiring detailed explanations. It's a hazard people understand. Don't go there. You'll get cancer is easier to accept than don't go there because space and time don't work correctly, and you might disappear into nothing. She handed me a printed map. Study these routes tonight. Tomorrow you shadow me for one more day. After that, you're on solo patrols. 8-hour shifts. Multiple zones. All you'll have is your radio, your tablet, and the protocols. Questions? What happened here? What caused the dead zones? Keiko was quiet for a long moment. Different theories. Some think the research facility found something while drilling, broke through to something that should have stayed buried. Others think this area was always wrong and the facility was built to study it, to contain it. A few believe the facility created the dead zones through experiments that went catastrophically wrong. But honestly, we don't know. And the scientists who worked here in the early days, the ones who might have known, are all dead. Or missing. Or they signed NDAs so severe they've never spoken a word. All we know is that certain locations within this compound are fundamentally hostile to human presence. And our job is to monitor them, document changes, follow the protocols. That's it. That night I couldn't sleep again. I kept thinking about the figure in the forest, about Robertson walking back toward the core zone, about Patricia Dunn investigating a researcher who didn't exist, about 3 officers whose bodies were never found. I studied the routes, memorized timing, learned which zones I could enter during which hours, which areas were completely forbidden regardless of circumstances, which protocols applied to which situations. By 3 a.m. I had it all committed to memory. The routes, the rules, the consequences of breaking them. The next day, Keiko took me to an orange zone. Larger area, less concentrated anomalies, but still dangerous. We found a section where trees had fallen in perfect radial patterns. Another area where the ground was warm despite the October cold. A lake that was frozen solid even though the temperature was above freezing. All of it is documented. None of it explained. On the 3rd day we went to a black zone. Zone Black 1. The oldest. The most dangerous. The one with the strictest protocols. This zone had a double fence. Cameras every 10 meters. Motion sensors. And a sign that was different from the others. Zone Black 1. Entry forbidden except under Directive 7 emergency protocols. Authorized personnel only. No solo entry. Maximum time limit. 15 minutes. All entries must be logged and approved. Keiko scanned both our badges. The system logged our entry. Started a 15-minute countdown on our radios. We have exactly 15 minutes, she said. Not a second longer. At 14 minutes, we start moving toward the exit. In 15 minutes, if we're not out, armed security comes in to extract us by force. No exceptions. No extensions. This zone doesn't allow longer exposure. Why? Because people who stay too long don't come back out the same. They develop what the medical staff calls integration symptoms. Compulsive desire to return to the zone. Dreams about the forest. Hearing voices that aren't there. Eventually they stop fighting it. They come back during off hours. Disable the cameras. Cross the fence. And they're never seen again. We entered Zone Black 1. The change was immediate and severe. The world looked normal but felt utterly wrong. Like reality was slightly out of focus. The ground beneath my feet felt unstable even though it was solid rock. The air tasted metallic. And everywhere I looked, I saw movement at the edge of my vision. Figures between trees. Shadows that moved against the light source. Shapes that shouldn't exist. "Don't look directly at anything," Keiko said. "Keep moving. Check the boundary markers. Document positions. But don't study the anomalies. Don't try to understand what you're seeing. Zone Black 1 affects perception. Makes you see things. If you focus on them, they become more real, more solid, and then they can interact with you." We moved quickly, checking markers, taking readings. Every second felt like an hour. The wrongness of this place pressed against my mind, trying to get in, trying to make me stop and look and understand. But I kept moving, followed by Keiko, trusted the protocol. After 14 minutes, we turned back. At 14 minutes and 50 seconds, we reached the gate. We crossed the threshold. The countdown stopped. The world snapped back into focus. I bent over, hands on my knees, breathing hard. "You did well," Keiko said. She wasn't even winded. Some people panic their first time in Black 1. Some freeze. Some refuse to ever go back. But you followed protocol. Keep moving. That's all this job requires. Follow the protocols. Trust the rules. Even when you don't understand. Especially when you don't understand. She looked at me seriously. "Tomorrow you start solo patrols. You'll work in red zones mostly. Occasional orange zones. Black 1 only twice a month with a partner. You'll see things. You'll want to investigate. You'll want to help figures that look like people. You'll want to understand what's happening. Don't just follow the routes. Document anomalies. Report back. That's how you survive. That's how you avoid becoming another case file." That evening, I received my official assignment. Solo patrols starting tomorrow. 8-hour shifts. 4 days on, 3 days off. Routes through 6 different zones. All the protocols. All the rules. All the consequences of breaking them. And as I lay in bed that night, I understood something Victor had tried to tell me. This wasn't really a security job. We weren't protecting the facility from intruders. We were being sacrificed, put into zones that shouldn't have human presence, exposed to anomalies that changed people. Also, someone could document what happened, study the patterns, learn the rules, figure out how to survive proximity to whatever existed in those dead zones. My badge didn't protect me here. My training was worthless. The only thing between me and disappearing was a set of protocols written in the blood of people who'd learned these rules the hard way. And tomorrow I'd join them, walk the paths they'd walked, see the things they'd seen, follow the rules they'd written before they disappeared. Because in the dead zones of Northern Ontario, authority means nothing. Federal clearance is irrelevant. The only thing that matters is following the protocols exactly. And even that only improves your chances. It doesn't guarantee survival. It just makes disappearing slightly less likely. And that's the job I'd signed up for. That's what interior security really meant. Not protecting people, but being protected just enough to document the things that killed the people who came before me. All while hoping I'd be smart enough, disciplined enough, lucky enough to not become the next name in the case files. The next officer who broke protocol and never came back. Tomorrow I'd find out if I could handle it. If I could walk through wrongness and not investigate. If I could see figures that looked human and keep moving. If I could follow rules that didn't make sense and trust they'd keep me alive. Tomorrow my real education will begin. And I'd learn what my supervisor meant when he said my badge doesn't protect me here. My first solo patrol started at 6 a.m. on a Thursday. I checked out my equipment. Radio, tablet, GPS tracker, emergency beacon, Flashlight, even though I'd be done before dark. All standard gear. But I also received items that weren't standard. A small vial of salt. A compass that pointed in directions other than north. And a leather-bound notebook filled with handwritten observations from previous officers. Victor met me at the equipment desk. "That notebook is your real training manual," he said. "Every interior officer adds to it. Observations, warning signs, close calls, things the official protocols don't cover because they can't be quantified or explained. Read the entries from your assigned zones before each patrol. And if you survive long enough, you'll add your own. If I survive, the average tenure for interior security is 18 months. Some make it longer. Some quit after a few weeks. 3 never made it out." He handed me a paper form. "This is your route assignment for today. Zone Red 7, Red 3, and Orange 2. Standard perimeter checks. Boundary marker documentation. Should take 7 hours if you maintain pace. You have an 8-hour window. Do not exceed it. Do not deviate from the route. Do not investigate anomalies beyond visual documentation. Clear. Clear." And Morgan? The protocols exist for a reason. Every single rule. Even the ones that seem paranoid or superstitious. They're written in blood and disappearances. Follow them exactly. I took the route assignment. Headed for the interior checkpoint. The gate guard logged my entry time. Handed me a physical key for emergency gates. "Timer starts now," he said. "You've got 8 hours. If you're not back by 1400 hours, we initiate search protocols. Try not to make us do that." I entered the interior zones alone for the first time. The silence hit immediately. Complete absence of natural sound. Just my footsteps on frozen ground. My breathing. The distant hum of the facility's generators. Nothing else. Zone Red 7 was my first stop. The one I'd visited with Keiko. I approached the perimeter cautiously. Checked the notebook. The most recent entry was from 2 weeks ago. Officer named James Park. His handwriting was cramped, nervous. Red 7, Northeast Quadrant. Marker 23 was knocked over again. Reset by maintenance but fell again within 24 hours. Something inside doesn't want that marker standing. Recommend increased monitoring. I also saw a figure at grid D8. Same as always. Tall. Too thin. Watch but don't approach. Yet. I flipped back through older entries. Red 7 had been monitored for 15 years. The anomalies had remained consistent. Fallen markers. Figures inside the core zone. Objects that appeared and disappeared. Geometric frost patterns. Nothing violent. Nothing that directly threatened observers. Just constant patient wrongness. I started my perimeter check. Markers 1 through 10 were fine. 11 was slightly tilted. I documented it. 12 through 22 were normal. Then I reached marker 23. It was down again. Knocked inward. Just like when I'd been here with Keiko. But this time something was different. There was a trail in the frost. Like something had been dragged from outside the core zone to inside it. The trail led right up to the fallen marker, then continued inward about 10 meters before disappearing. Protocol 8. Document unusual tracks or trails but do not follow them. Do not attempt to identify what made them. I took photos. Made notes on my tablet. I tried not to think about what could have left that trail. I tried not to imagine what had been dragged into the core zone. Keep moving. At marker 31, I saw the figure again. Same spot as before. Tall. Thin. Motionless. It stood about 40 meters inside the yellow boundary. Just visible through the trees. This time I didn't look away immediately. I studied it for maybe 3 seconds. Long enough to see details that made my stomach turn. It wasn't wearing clothes. Its surface was too smooth, too uniform, like it had been carved from dark wood or stone. And though it had a vaguely human shape, the proportions were all wrong. Arms too long, legs that bent backward, a head that was slightly too large and completely featureless. I forced myself to look away, keep walking, but I felt it watching me, following my movement with attention that didn't require eyes. I completed the perimeter check faster than scheduled, got back to the gate, logged the compromised marker, moved on to Zone Red 3. Red 3 was different, smaller core zone, but the anomalies were more active. I'd read the notebook entries. Officers reported objects that moved on their own, sounds that had no source, and occasionally voices, always the same voice, always saying the same thing. I approached the perimeter, checked the first marker, normal. The second marker had scratch marks, deep gouges in the metal post, like something with claws had tried to pull it down. The third marker was fine. The fourth marker was missing entirely. Protocol 16. If boundary markers are missing, do not enter that section of the perimeter. Mark it on your map and report immediately. I backed away from the gap in the markers. Note the position. Started to move toward the next intact section. That's when I heard it. Help. The voice came from inside the core zone. Weak. Desperate. Humans. Please. Help me. I'm hurt. Protocol 15. If you hear voices calling for help from restricted zones, do not respond. Do not investigate. The voices are not human. They are mimicry. They will sound like people you know. They will say things designed to make you violate protocol. Ignore them completely. I kept walking. Didn't respond. Didn't look toward the voice. But it followed me along the perimeter. Morgan, please. It's me. I'm lost. I can't find my way out. It knew my name. The voice was changing, becoming familiar. It sounded like my sister, like Rachel. But Rachel lived in Toronto. Rachel had never been to this facility. Rachel was safe at home with her family. Morgan, why won't you help me? I'm scared. Please. My hands were shaking. I wanted to call out. I wanted to tell the voice to shut up. But that would be acknowledging it. That would be engaging. Protocol 15 was absolute. No response. No investigation. Complete silence. I completed the Red 3 perimeter check with that voice following me the entire time. Sometimes it sounded like Rachel. Sometimes like my mother. Once it sounded like Victor, asking why I'd abandoned my post. But I didn't respond. Didn't look. Didn't acknowledge it existed. When I finally left Red 3 and the voice stopped, I realized I'd been crying. Tears running down my face. Hands clenched so tight my nails had drawn blood from my palms. But I'd followed protocol. I'd survived. Orange 2 was my final zone for the day. Larger area. Less concentrated anomalies. I was supposed to check 3 boundary sections and document environmental readings. Temperature. Radiation levels. Electromagnetic field measurements. All of it would be normal. The readings always were. Whatever made these zones wrong wasn't something our instruments could detect. I was halfway through Orange 2 when my radio crackled. Static. Then Victor's voice. Unit 7, this is the base. Report status. I grabbed the radio. Base, this is Unit 7. I'm in Orange 2, Southeast Quadrant. Status normal. Copy that. Be advised, we're seeing unusual activity on cameras near your position. Multiple heat signatures moving parallel to your route. Recommend accelerated pace through this section. My blood went cold. What kind of heat signatures? Uncertain. They're moving on 2 legs. Human-sized. But they're staying just outside camera range. always at the edge of the frame. Recommend you maintain visual awareness and complete this section quickly. I looked around. The forest was silent, empty, but I felt watched. That certainty comes from predator attention. Something was out there. Multiple things. Pacing me. Following my route. Protocol 23. If you detect signs of being followed in orange or red zones, do not run. Do not leave the designated path. Maintain normal pace but increased alertness. Most entities in these zones respond to fear or panic. Calm, methodical movement is safest. I kept walking. Normal pace. But my hand stayed near my radio. My eyes scanned the trees. I saw nothing. But the feeling of being watched intensified. Whatever was out there was getting closer. Then I saw them. Not directly. Just movement at the periphery of my vision. Figures between the trees. Keeping pace with me. I counted at least 5. Maybe more. They moved in perfect synchronization. When I walked, they walked. When I paused to check a marker, they stopped. When I moved again, they continued. I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed to get out of this zone as fast as possible. But Protocol 23 was absolute. Normal pace. No panic. I maintained my route. Checked every marker. Took every reading. Acted like I didn't notice the figures shadowing my every move. It took 40 minutes to complete Orange 2. The longest 40 minutes of my life. The figures stayed with me the entire time. Never approaching. Never making a sound. Just constant, patient presence at the edge of visibility. When I finally crossed back into the green zone, they stopped at the boundary. I could see them more clearly now. 7 figures. Human shape but wrong. Too tall. Too thin. Skin that was too dark, too smooth like polished stone. They stood in a line. All facing me. All perfectly still. I wanted to look back. Wanted to see if they were still there. But I kept walking. Got back to the checkpoint. Logged my completion time. 13 hours, 47 minutes. Well within my 8-hour window. No violations. No incidents. Just another routine patrol. Except my hands wouldn't stop shaking. My heart was pounding. And when I closed my eyes, I saw those figures. Watching. Waiting. Following. Victor met me at the debrief. Camera footage confirms 7 entities paced you through Orange 2. Standard pattern. They follow new officers. Testing them. Seeing if they'll panic. Run. Break protocol. You did well. You maintained composure. They'll lose interest after a few more patrols. What are they? We don't know. We call them followers. They appear in most zones. Sometimes they just watch. Sometimes they pace patrols. They've never attacked anyone. Never crossed into green zones. But officers who've run from them, who've left the designated paths to escape them, have disappeared. The followers don't chase. But leaving the path puts you in areas where other things exist. Things that aren't as passive as the followers. He handed me a paper. Tomorrow you're off. The day after you're back on patrol. Different routes. More zones. You'll see other phenomena. Other entities. Some will be like the followers. Some will be worse. But as long as you follow the protocols, as long as you trust the rules, you'll be safe. Relatively safe anyway. I went home. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw the figure in red 7. I heard the voice in red 3 calling my name in Rachel's voice. Felt the followers pacing me through Orange 2. All of it was wrong. Impossible. But it was real. I'd seen it. Documented it. Survived it. And tomorrow I had to write my first entry in the notebook. Add my observations to 15 years of documentation. Warn future officers about marker 23 in red 7. About the voice in red 3 that knows your name. About the followers in Orange 2 who test your nerve. That notebook was full of warnings. Full of close calls and near misses and things that shouldn't exist but do. Every officer who'd worked interior had added their experiences, their observations, their advice for surviving zones where reality didn't work correctly. And now it was my turn. My turn to document the wrongness. My turn to add to the collective knowledge. My turn to help the next officer survive their first encounters with things that existed in the dead zones. Because that's what this job really was. Not security, not protection, but documentation. Recording the patterns of entities that shouldn't exist. Learning the rules of zones where natural law didn't apply. Building a survival manual for people who'd worked these zones after me. If I survived long enough to write it. If I didn't become another disappeared officer. Another case file. Another name in the list of people who broke protocol and never came back. But I'd made it through day one. I'd followed the rules. Survived the tests. Documented the anomalies. Tomorrow I'll rest. Study the notebook. Prepare for the next patrol. And slowly, day by day, patrol by patrol, I'd learn to work in zones where my badge didn't protect me, where my authority was meaningless, where the only thing keeping me alive was a set of protocols written by people who'd faced these same entities and barely survived. That's what interior security meant. And I was beginning to understand why the average tenure was only 18 months. Why do some officers quit after a few weeks? Why 3 never made it out? Because eventually the dead zones get inside you. Eventually you start hearing the voices even when you're in green zones. Eventually you dream about the figures watching from the trees. And eventually some officers can't resist anymore. They go back during off hours. They cross the boundaries. They violate the protocols. And they're never seen again. Over the next 3 weeks, the patrols became routine. I learned to walk past figures without flinching. I learned to ignore voices that called my name. Learned which zones had which entities and what their patterns were. The followers in Orange 2 appeared every patrol. The voice in Red 3 cycled through people I knew. The figure in Red 7 never moved, but marker 23 kept falling. But I also started noticing changes. Subtle ones. The zones were expanding. Markers that had been stable for years were now shifting positions overnight. Core zones that had maintained consistent boundaries were growing. In Red 3, the area where the voice could be heard had extended 20 meters beyond the perimeter. In Orange 5, temperature anomalies were appearing in sections that had been normal last month. Other officers noticed too. During briefings, we'd compare notes. Everyone was documenting expansion, growth. The dead zones were getting larger, more active, and no one knew why. Then the disappearances started again. Not officers this time, researchers. The facility employed about 30 scientists who studied the zones from a distance. They worked in the main buildings, analyzed our documentation, ran tests on samples we collected. They never entered the dead zones themselves. That was protocol. Research staff stayed in green zones. Only security patrols entered restricted areas. But one morning, a researcher named Dr. Amanda Pierce didn't show up for work. Her apartment was empty. Her car was in the parking lot. Security footage showed her leaving her quarters at 3 a.m., walking toward the interior gates. The cameras lost her after that. We found her ID badge at the fence of Zone Black 1. The gate was still locked. The security system showed no entry, but her badge was there, lying on the ground, just inside the fence, like she'd thrown it there. Or like something had taken it from her and left it as a message. Search teams wouldn't enter Black 1 to look for her. Protocol forbade it. Zone Black 1 had a 15-minute exposure limit for a reason. Extended searches weren't possible. Dr. Pierce was declared missing. Her quarters were sealed. Her research was classified. And we all knew she was gone. Integrated. Part of the zone now. I started having dreams. Not nightmares exactly. Just strange, vivid dreams where I walked through the zones without fear. Where I could see the figures clearly. Where they communicated in ways that made perfect sense in the dream but evaporated when I woke. In the dreams, they weren't threatening. They were trying to show me something. Explain something. Make me understand. I told Victor about the dreams during a routine psychological evaluation. All interior officers had weekly evaluations. Standard procedure. They were checking for integration symptoms. The dreams are normal, Victor said. Early exposure. Your brain is trying to process what you're seeing. But if they become compulsive, if you start wanting to return to the zones during off hours, you report it immediately. That's stage 2 integration. That's when we pull you from interior work. What's stage 3? Stage 3 is when you stop reporting the compulsions. When you start planning how to enter the zones without authorization. When you disable your tracker and cross the boundaries at night. That's when officers disappear. Dr. Pierce was exhibiting stage 2 symptoms for 3 weeks before she vanished. She should have reported them. Should have requested removal from proximity to the zones. But she didn't. She thought she could control it. She was wrong. The dreams got worse. More vivid. More compelling. I started waking up with the urge to get dressed and drive to the facility. To walk into the zones. To finally understand what the figures wanted. What they were trying to show me. But I fought it. Told Victor about every compulsion, every dream, every moment of wanting to violate protocol. You're handling it correctly, he said, acknowledging the integration symptoms, fighting them. Most officers who disappear don't tell anyone what they're experiencing. They try to resist alone, and they fail. Keep reporting, keep fighting. The symptoms usually plateau after 6 months. Then they either fade or intensify. If they fade, you can continue. If they intensify, we reassign you. 6 weeks into my interior work, something changed in Zone Red 7. I was doing my routine patrol when I noticed marker 23 wasn't just down. It was gone. Completely removed. A perfect circular hole in the ground where it had been. Like something had pulled it out, roots and all. And standing at the edge of that hole was the figure. But it wasn't inside the core zone anymore. It was at the boundary, right at the yellow line. Still not crossing, but closer than it had ever been. I documented it. I took photos. I reported it immediately. Victor ordered an emergency perimeter reinforcement. Additional markers. Camera installation. Increased patrol frequency, but we all knew what it meant. The core zones were pushing outward, testing boundaries, seeing how far they could expand. 2 days later, I found the missing marker. It was in Zone Black 1. I wasn't supposed to be there that day, but my route had been changed because another officer called in sick. I was doing a quick perimeter check with a partner when I saw it. Marker 23 from Red 7, planted in the ground just inside the Black 1 fence, like it had been deliberately moved, relocated, claimed by something in the worst zone. My partner, an officer named David Cross, saw it too. "That's not supposed to be here," he said. "That's from Red 7. I've seen it in your reports. How did it get here?" "I don't know. Should we remove it? Bring it back to Red 7? Protocol 27. Do not remove objects that have migrated between zones. Do not attempt to return them to their original locations. Migration patterns are being studied. Interference could trigger unknown consequences. We document it," I said. "We don't touch it. Something moved it here for a reason. We need to figure out what that reason is before we interfere." We took photos, marked coordinates, completed our patrol. But the marker's presence in Black 1 disturbed me. It suggested the zones were connected somehow, that entities could move between them, that something from Red 7 could travel to Black 1. And if objects could migrate, what else could move between zones? That night I barely slept. I kept thinking about the marker, about the figure at the boundary, about Dr. Pierce's badge inside the Black 1 fence, about patterns I couldn't quite see but knew existed. The zones weren't separate. They were part of something larger, something coordinated, something that was slowly expanding its territory, testing our boundaries, preparing for something we didn't understand. The next morning, I found a new entry in the notebook, written in shaky handwriting I didn't recognize. The entry was dated 3 days ago but had been added overnight while the notebook was locked in security. They're not in the zone. The zones are in them. We built the facility on top of something vast, something old. The dead zones aren't contaminated areas. They're places where it's closest to the surface, where the boundary is thinnest. And it's waking up, getting stronger. Soon the zones won't be contained by markers and fences. Soon they'll overlap, merge, consume the facility and everything around it. I'm writing this so someone knows, so someone understands. I'm going to Black 1 tonight. I need to see the source. I need to understand what we've been living on top of. If I don't come back, tell my family I loved them. Tell them I'm sorry. But someone has to know the truth. Someone has to see what's at the center. The entry wasn't signed, but the handwriting matched Dr. Pierce's signature from old forms. She'd written this 3 days before she disappeared. 3 days before we found her badge in Black 1. She'd known what she was going to do, known it violated every protocol, but she'd done it anyway, because the integration symptoms had won. Because she couldn't resist anymore. I showed Victor the entry. He read it without expression. Then he locked the notebook in his safe. "This stays classified," he said. "We don't share Dr. Pierce's theories with other officers. We don't discuss what might be under the facility. We focus on the protocols, on survival, on documentation. That's all." But what if she was right? What if the zones are growing because something underneath is? Then there's nothing we can do about it except follow the protocols and hope they're enough. He looked at me seriously. "Morgan, you're showing classic signs of early obsession. Trying to understand. Trying to find patterns. Trying to explain what you're seeing. That's how integration starts. You need to step back. Take some leave. Get away from the zones for a while." "I'm fine. I'm following protocols. I'm not having compulsions anymore." "You're lying." His voice was flat. "I can see it in your face. You're thinking about the zones constantly, dreaming about them, wondering what's at the center of Black 1, wondering what Dr. Pierce saw before she disappeared. That's stage 2 integration. You're exactly where she was 3 weeks before she vanished." He was right. I couldn't stop thinking about it. About the figure at the boundary. About the migrating marker. About what might exist at the center of the zones where reality broke down completely. I wanted to know. I needed to know. The compulsion was growing stronger every day. "I'm pulling you from interior work," Victor said. "Effective immediately. You'll return to outer security. Standard checkpoints. No zone access. Mandatory counseling. Medication if necessary. We're catching this early enough that you should recover. But if you resist, if you try to access the zones unauthorized, we'll terminate your employment and ban you from the facility permanently." Understood. I should have felt relieved. Should have been grateful he was saving me from Dr. Pierce's fate. But instead I felt rage. Betrayal. like he was taking away something essential, something I needed. And that reaction told me he was absolutely right. The zones had gotten inside me. I was being integrated. Another few weeks and I might have done exactly what Dr. Pierce did. I accepted the reassignment, started counseling, took medication that dulled the compulsions but left me feeling hollow. I worked outside security for 8 weeks. No zone access, no anomalies, just normal security work, checking IDs, monitoring cameras, breaking up the occasional trespasser. The compulsions faded. The dreams stopped. After 3 months, I felt mostly normal again. I could think about the zones without obsession, could remember the figures without feeling drawn to them, could analyze my experience objectively. I understood now what Victor had meant. The zones don't just exist in specific locations. They get inside people, change their perception, make them want to cross boundaries, make them think integration is understanding, that becoming part of the zones is enlightenment rather than destruction. But I also understood something else. I could never work interior design again, could never be trusted near the dead zones. Because even now, even medicated and counseled and supposedly recovered, part of me still wanted to go back. I still wanted to cross the yellow markers. Still wanted to see what Dr. Pierce saw before she disappeared into Zone Black 1. The zones were still expanding. New markers fell every week. Core boundaries pushed outward incrementally. And everyone working the facility knew it was only a matter of time before the zones overlapped. Before the entire compound became one massive dead zone. Before the thing underneath finished waking up. But that wasn't my problem anymore. I worked outside security, monitored fences, kept civilians away from an area they thought was contaminated by radiation, let other officers risk integration, let them document the expansion, let them follow protocols that might not be enough to stop what was coming, because I'd learned the final truth about interior security. It wasn't a job you survived. It was a job that slowly consumed you. Either you quit before integration progressed too far, or you stayed until the compulsions won and you disappeared into zones where your badge provided no protection, where authority meant nothing, where the only choice was between leaving or becoming something else, something that existed in dead zones, something that watched new officers from between the trees, something that had once been human but wasn't anymore. I chose to leave, accepted my limitations, acknowledged I couldn't work interior without eventually succumbing to integration. Some officers were stronger, could resist longer, could work the zones for years without being consumed, but I wasn't one of them. 3 months had been enough. Any longer and I would have ended up like Dr. Pierce, another disappeared researcher, another name in the case files. Now I work the outer fence. I check IDs. I watch the tree line. And sometimes, late at night when the facility is quiet, I hear voices from the forest, calling my name, inviting me back, promising understanding if I just cross the boundary one more time. But I don't go. I follow the protocols. I trust the rules. I remember that my badge doesn't protect me in those zones. And I accept that some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Some places are meant to be avoided. Some entities are meant to be documented from a distance and never truly understood. That's the lesson of the dead zones. That's what every officer eventually learns. You can study them. You can patrol them. You can document their expansion and their entities and their anomalies. But you can never truly understand them without being consumed by them. And once you're consumed, once you cross that final boundary, you never come back. The zones are still there, still expanding, still calling to people who get too close, still integrating officers who can't resist. And I'm still here working outer security, following protocols, surviving. Because in the dead zones of Northern Ontario, survival is the only victory, documentation is the only progress, and following the rules, even when they don't make sense, is the only thing standing between you and disappearing into zones where reality doesn't work, where your badge means nothing, and where something vast and old and patient waits for humans to make mistakes. I made a mistake. I got too close, but I got out. Others won't be so lucky. Others will follow Dr. Pierce into Black 1. Others will cross the yellow markers. Others will become the figures that watch from between the trees. But not me. I learned my lesson. I know my limits. I accept that some questions can't be answered. Some mysteries can't be solved. Some places can't be understood without losing yourself. And that's enough. That has to be enough. Because the alternative is becoming another disappeared officer. Another integration case. Another entity in the dead zones. And I'd rather stay human, even if it means never knowing what Dr. Pierce saw. Even if it means never understanding what exists at the center. Even if it means spending the rest of my career checking IDs at the outer fence while the zones expand and the entities multiply and something underneath slowly wakes up. Because my badge doesn't protect me there. And without the protocols, without the rules, without the discipline to resist integration, nothing does.